Hey everybody, this is John Fenn, Church Without Walls International, CWOWI.org. We are all about discipleship through the process of family-based, home-based churches. And we follow the historical pattern. For the first 300 years, the church rotated homes, rotated who led. They went from 120 people on the day of Pentecost to saturating the Roman Empire one home at a time over the course of 300 years. That's the practice that we have. Rotating homes, rotating who leads weekly as much as possible. And so on our website, cwowi.org, you can sign up for my weekly thoughts, which is a weekly email that comes out at short teaching every Friday U.S. time. You can also find there lots of things, videos, question answer, things of that nature about house church. And if you sign up for my weekly thoughts, that's where we put information about our Zoom meetings, our conferences, and such. So hope you'll do that. All right, today talking about over-spiritualizing things. And there's an element of Christianity which wants to ignore the reality to make it either the devil's fault or God's fault or something. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, nearly 40 years ago, it's hard for me to say that, but 40 years ago in my life, I had owned a pizza delivery restaurant or store, as we would call it, pizza delivery and carryout. I had worked as a manager for a pizza delivery chain, and the Lord led me to go in a place of no competition, start my own. And so I did that, and it was doing very well. It was supporting us. I was in ministry. I was in an unpaid position. I was an associate pastor, and it would have been foolish for me and presumptuous for me to just not do anything but somehow expect the ministry to support my young family. Because I was in my early 20s. You understand, this is a long time ago. And now I'm in my early 60s. So, so I started this pizza delivery store. It was doing real well. The pastor saw how well I was doing, and he had a son who's about my age who had some money. And the pastor was very intimidating. He played for the National Basketball Association in his younger days. About the time I was born, he was playing professional basketball. So he was taller than me. I'm nearly 2 meters tall, 6'6". And he was taller than me considerably. He outweighed me at 50 kilos or 100 pounds at least. And, to intimidate, he would put his foot up on a tabletop, stand there on the floor with one foot on a tabletop and kind of look down at you. And he was very intimidating. He knew how to do that. And he really pressured me to open a second store and install his son as manager. And I knew in my spirit that was wrong. It just didn't feel right with me. It just didn't sit right. I knew it was wrong, but I was the associate pastor. I was unpaid. He was going to retire and move me into the position of pastor. And he was very intimidating. It was just fear of man. And he was, 20 some years older than me. And here I was, in my early 20s, and I had the one successful store. And so I did it. I obeyed him. And and how I did it was spiritualizing it. I said, I know this isn't right in my spirit, but Lord will make up the difference. He knows I'm a man under authority, that I'm under this pastor in an unpaid position. And the Lord knows that I shouldn't stand up to him and all the different things. And I spiritualized it. I over-spiritualized it. Well, that store did horribly. I ended up having to sell it, and I ended up not getting any money for it because the guy I sold it to didn't know what he was doing. And it was a horrible thing. In fact, it was partially responsible for bringing down the first store, which we sold for very little, next to nothing profit-wise. It was a horrible, horrible experience, all because I over-spiritualized it. Now, what do I mean by over-spiritualizing? Some over-spiritualizing causes us to place too much value, too much importance on spiritual things, which allows us to ignore the screaming circumstances in our life. In other words, over-spiritualizing us allows us to place too much value on spiritual things or emphasis on certain things while ignoring what is the really important issues in our life. For instance, if I over-spiritualize my marriage, I'll never address the true issues that are causing strife and division and everything in my marriage. If I over-spiritualize my money troubles, I'll never come to a place where I'll discipline myself and on a budget and pay back debt and things of that nature. I'll over-spiritualize. I'll blame it on the devil. I'll say God is doing this or God is doing that. If I over-spiritualize my circumstances in life, then I'm just not going to face the hard facts. So it's wrong to think that every single act of life, every single event is somehow spiritual in nature. The Lord really doesn't care if you have to get up and go to the bathroom. that's not within his realm of directing you, unless it's something for your safety or convenience or whatever he tells you not to do it. It's kind of like you make a schedule and you feel prompted to go to item number 3 on your schedule first, instead of saving that for later in the day. And when you obey that prompting, then you find out that store was going to close early, and because you obeyed, you got there just before the store closed. That's properly spiritualizing things, because you're taking it to the Lord, and it's pretty much within your own authority, and you're just looking for his fine-tuning of your steps if there's anything that would be outside of his will. That's fine, and that's well and good. But over-spiritualizing prevents a person from dealing with the circumstances of their life. It allows a person to shrink back into a spiritual cave against something that they don't like. Maybe they don't like, it's even on bigger things, national elections or government policy. And it's kind of like, let's spiritualize it. Let's blame the devil. Let's prophesy. Let's have some things going on here. And that way I don't have to deal with the issues that I don't like in my country, in my community, in myself, in my life, et cetera, et cetera. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus said something very practical. He said, agree with your adversary quickly while you're in the way, lest you be found guilty and thrown into prison. A few verses later, he said to turn the other cheek, to give that extra coat, to walk that extra mile. He didn't spiritualize things. An example of spiritualization in Scripture would be the first chapter of the book of Ruth, where we are told in the first 5 verses that Naomi lost her husband and her 2 sons. And she told her daughters-in-law to go back, leave me. But, it was Ruth who followed her back to Israel. But Naomi said, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter, because God has dealt bitterly with me. And I understand the rough circumstances. She lost her husband. She lost her 2 sons. She's left there with her daughters-in-law and everything, and she feels horrible, but she's over-spiritualizing. She says, oh, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, bitter, because God has dealt bitterly with me. God has done this, and she's spiritualizing it. Now, fortunately, she came out of that in a very practical way, moved back to Israel with her daughter, Ruth, and who ended up marrying Boaz, who was the son of Rahab, the former harlot, and Salmon, we're told in Matthew 1:5, and she becomes in the lineage of King David and, of course, of the Lord. So, it's a wonderful story in the book of Ruth, but it starts out with Naomi coming out of spiritualizing things. So the thing on my heart today is to share with you that I've been there, I've done that. 40 years ago, I spiritualized things that got me into a horrible mess financially and in the relationship with my boss and my pastor, et cetera, all because I didn't have a backbone to stand up and analyze it logically and with reason and say, you know what, this isn't of God. And if you will pray about it, you'll admit that this isn't God. So I've been there, done that. So don't over spiritualize things. Don't examine your heart and say, am I blaming the devil when in fact it was my decisions that put me in this circumstance, or it was the decisions of other people, but I have to deal with those decisions. When you look in the pages of the New Testament, there is precious little that blames the devil. When Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 5, I think it's about, it's verse 23, Paul said, no longer just drink water, but drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. Back in the Roman Empire days, they diluted their wine anywhere from 40 parts water to 1 part wine, to the more common was 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 parts water to 1 part wine. And Paul's telling Timothy to drink more full strength wine because alcohol will kill parasites. So basically in 1 Timothy 5:23, he says, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. And in Philippians chapter 4, let me read that there, chapter 2, verses 25 through 27, he talks about Epaphroditus, who had been sick, but God spared him, lest Epaphroditus and Paul have grief because of the work that they're doing in the ministry. And Paul doesn't spiritualize it. He doesn't blame the devil, nor does he blame God. He just says, hey, Epaphroditus was sick, and God spared him and raised him up, and he's healed now. Paul dealt with, the letters of the New Testament deal with the circumstances. Let him that stole steal no more, he said in Ephesians chapter 4. He didn't spiritualize it and say, okay, you stole because your great-grandmother opened that door, your great-grandfather was a thief, and that spirit came down through the family line. He didn't over-spiritualize it. He said, hey, you used to be a thief. Stop it. That's not how you've learned Christ. Make the right decision so that you can get a job, work with your hands so that you've got money to give to those in need. That's how you deal with it. You cut away the spiritual stuff, do what is right first, and then trust the Lord to guide you from there. All right, God bless. Talk to you later.